There are women who are pushed aside by life. There are men who think they have buried their hearts under the mountain snow, and then fate forces them to face a choice that no one dares to face. Continue to be lonely, or open their hearts one more time, even though they know they might get hurt again. Evelyn was abandoned, labeled worthless, and trudged into the wilderness just to find a place to breathe. Jonah lost his wife, his faith, and his reason to laugh. But fate placed them under the same roof amidst the howling wind and the blazing fire every night. If it were you, if you had ever experienced a loss that seemed impossible to recover from, would you have the courage to love again, or would you shrink back into silence, like many old hearts do? This is not just a love story between a mountain man and a woman rejected by life. This is a story of rebirth, of healing, and of choosing to be brave when your heart is still scarred. Stay. This story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to join me on this emotional journey. The early autumn wind swept through Sage Hollow, carrying wisps of yellow dust as thin as smoke. The stagecoach from Cheyenne had just stopped at the trading post steps. The wheels screeched to a halt, leaving behind the smell of horsehide, burnt wood, and a cold that slapped against the face like the hand of the Wild West. Evelyn Marlowe tightened her grip on the worn canvas bag. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold but from the emptiness that swirled inside her. She stood still for a moment before stepping down her boots, making a soft, hard sound like a sigh of fate. Sage Hollow was smaller than she'd expected. Just a row of low wooden houses, a tavern, a general store, and a church built on dusty dirt. In the distance, the Wind River Mountains loomed like huge stone walls between this world and the rest of America. Looking around, Evelyn realized that this was nothing like Kansas. Not just unlike, but a completely different slice of life. Deserted, cold, and challenging. The people here were quiet, their eyes cautious, and women as rare as summer rain. She pulled on her dark blue wool coat, the only thing that still looked like it belonged to a cultured person despite years of patching. Her long ash-gray skirt was dusty from days of travel. Her brownish gold hair was tied back in a bun, a few strands falling over her ears in the strong wind. Evelyn knew she was neither young nor beautiful. At 38, all she had left was the straight back her father had taught her, the calm forged by suffering, and deep blue eyes that always seemed to hold the storms of the past. And today, here she was on a marriage contract, a mail-order bride, a wife by mail, someone no one wanted except a man they had never met. Evelyn smiled sadly. It was enough to hide some of the bitterness that was rising. She paused, reaching into the inside pocket of her coat. The marriage certificate lay there, neatly folded in half, printed in a smeared hand. Jonah Ridgewell, Wyoming mountain man, 45 years old, widowed, has a young son, needs a partner, needs a real home. Those words pulled her away from Kansas, a place she once believed she would have a home. But after a horseback riding accident at age 29, doctors diagnosed her with severe uterine damage. Her then-fiancé, Edward, stood still as a wooden post when he heard the news and said something colder than winter. "If you can't have children, you can't be my wife." She was sent home like a defective item, a shadow, a misfortune. 10 years later, she still remembers that disgusting look and the humiliation of being abandoned by her family. That's why she's standing in Sage Hollow, where no one knows her story, where she can start over or repeat the same tragedy. The driver put his hand to his hat and nodded slightly to her. "We're here, ma'am." She heard the word like a knife, but nodded anyway. "Thank you." As she stepped down, she saw a few men standing in front of the tavern. They glanced at her, not vulgarly, not pryingly, just the quiet stares of men accustomed to the scarcity of women there. Evelyn did not bow her head. She straightened her back. As she was trying to calm herself, a strong gust of wind blew past and the edge of her scarf fluttered. She quickly stepped forward to catch it, but before she could react, a strong hand gently held the end of the scarf for her. A deep, slow voice sounded from behind. "Miss Marlowe." Evelyn turned around. And for the first time she saw the man who would change her life. He wasn't particularly tall, but his frame was broad and sturdy like an old pine tree. His dark leather jacket was dusty, his leather gloves were thin and worn, and his wide-brimmed hat hid his slightly gray hair. His face was as rugged as the mountains, but his eyes— there was something in his eyes that surprised her. Not cold, not judgmental, just quiet and deep. "You are?" Evelyn said slowly. Jonah Ridgewell. His voice was low and hoarse like wind through a tree trunk. We wrote letters. Evelyn swallowed, then nodded. I know. Jonah looked down at the small bag in her hand. Is that all your luggage? Yes, she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. Jonah said nothing more, but his eyes showed sadness. Not pity, just pity. He took her bag without asking, without making her feel small, just like it was the natural thing for a decent man to do. It's about 8 miles back to the farm, he said, turning slightly. It's getting dark. We should go. Evelyn followed and realized for the first time that the silence around Jonah was not cold, but wide as a forest, enough to breathe without fear of being judged. As he helped her into the carriage, his hand brushed hers lightly. And in that moment, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years, feeling safe. Even if it was just a glimpse. Even if she didn't dare believe it. The road ahead was still as hazy as the mists of the Wind River Mountains. But as Jonah pulled on the reins and the wagon began to move, Evelyn felt something strange creep into her mind. An incomplete question. Is this where God wants her to be? Or just another journey that leads her deeper into loneliness? The sound of horse hooves on the dry ground was steady like the heartbeat of the West. And in the slightly shaking carriage, Evelyn clutched her cloth bag and said to herself, no matter what, I won't fall. Not again. The carriage bounced gently over bumps on the road leading out of Sage Hollow. The sun had already tilted toward the mountains, casting long, shimmering rays across the vast meadows. Evelyn sat upright, her hands on her thighs, feeling the steady rocking of the wheels. But what caught her attention most was the man sitting beside her. Jonah Ridgewell. He said nothing. He made no unnecessary movements. Except occasionally when the cold wind blew harder, he would lean slightly as if to block the wind for her without seeming to do so on purpose. That made Evelyn feel her chest lighten as if something had been put down after carrying it for many years. Jonah was tall, but his presence did not weigh down those around him. Instead, his silence carried a sense of rock-solid stability, a feeling Evelyn rarely felt in men. No bragging, no imposing, just being and letting others breathe. The wind carried the scent of snow down from the mountainside, signaling the early arrival of winter. Jonah tugged gently on the reins, speaking in a low, warm but clear voice. The wind has changed direction. It will be very cold tonight. Evelyn turned around and only dared to reply softly, then should we go faster, sir? Jonah nodded, his blue-gray eyes turned toward the purple horizon. Just a little. This horse knows the way. He knows when to run and when to rest. The way he spoke about horses, about land, was the same way he looked at everything, calm, thoughtful, and respectful. Evelyn watched the way Jonah held the reins. His fingers were thick and calloused, covered with old cuts, the hands of a man who had worked outdoors all his life. But when the wagon jolted, that hand rested on the seat beside her, ready to catch her if she lost her balance. A small action, but it made her heart beat fast. She suddenly realized she was holding her breath and quickly turned her face away. For some reason, kindness always made her tremble more than cruelty. Because cruelty was too familiar, but kindness was like a luxury gift that she was afraid to accept. Jonah continued speaking, his voice slow but not distant. How long did it take you to get from Kansas to Cheyenne? Almost a week, Evelyn replied, trying to keep her voice even. And then, 3 days from Cheyenne to here. Jonah nodded slightly, his eyes flashing with sympathy that Evelyn didn't dare look at for long. The road is so long. Are you tired? I am used to it. Evelyn smiled lightly. After all, this is not the longest journey I have ever experienced. Jonah turned to look at her, his eyes asking for more, but then he said nothing, not pressing her to say more, not prying too hard. Evelyn felt herself soften. A man who knew when to ask and when to keep quiet was a rare thing. A moment later, Jonah called her name for the first time, Evelyn. She started slightly. Yes, sir, call me Jonah. He said it simply, but his voice carried an indescribable sincerity. She bowed her head and softly replied, So, Jonas. He laughed, a hoarse, short but warm laugh. Jonah. No, S. Evelyn blushed. I'm sorry. I don't usually call strange men by their names. It's okay, Jonah said, his smile still intact. That laughter was like someone had just opened a small window in a long, dark house. The peaceful moment lasted for a while until Evelyn saw a shallow creek in the distance. The water trickled over rocks, the late afternoon sun illuminating the surface like a thin silver strip. "So beautiful," she whispered. Jonah followed her gaze. "That's Dry Willow Creek. When the snow melts, the water is really high. In the spring, the fish swim upstream. Simon loves to come out here and watch." "Simon?" Evelyn asked softly. "My son," he replied, his expression softening slightly. "He is 7. He is quiet, but he is a good boy." A part of Evelyn clenched, not from fear but from the uncertainty of entering this child's life. Was she good enough? Would she upset him with her lack of maternal sensitivity? She tried to smile. "I hope to see you soon, Simon." Jonah did not answer immediately. He just looked at the road ahead and said in a voice so low that it was half carried away by the wind, "I think he will like you." Evelyn bowed her head and something in her heart melted like snow in the sun. Not love. No. It was too early for that. But a glimmer of hope. Small as a candle but enduring. The car continued on the bumpy road past old fences through cracked red earth. With each mile, Evelyn's heart felt a step further away from Kansas. An hour later, the twilight fell over the distant mountains, dragging the last rays of the day with it. It was getting dark. Jonah twisted the reins, signaling the horse to slow down. "We have about 4 miles to go," he said. "Just a little longer." "Yes," Evelyn replied softly. Silence fell again, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was as if there was a fragile bridge between the two of them, built with small conversations, not too long glances, and enough presence so that neither of them felt forced. She tilted her head to look at Jonah when he wasn't looking. His face was hard, his features firm, his eyes as blue-gray as the winter sky. But behind that hardness, there was a loneliness she recognized at first sight. A man lost his wife. A father had to raise his children alone. A man used to living in silence so as not to bother anyone. Evelyn realized. Maybe she wasn't the only one looking for a place to start over. The cold wind blew harder. Jonah leaned toward her, not touching but close enough to block out the chill. "Evelyn," he called again, his voice deeper this time. "Yes, if God gives us more children." He paused. "Would you be willing to raise them to be good people?" Evelyn paused. It wasn't a question she'd buried in her past. Not one about her fertility. Not one about her abandonment. It is a question of responsibility, of will, of choosing to live. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, her voice as soft as the wind. I will do my best." Jonah simply replied, "Good." Simple. But enough to make her heart beat fast like it was not used to this rhythm. In the distance, against the gathering darkness, the wooden roof of Ridgewell Farm could be seen. A place where no one knows her. No one judges her. A place that could be home. Evelyn took a deep breath, her hands clenching her skirt to calm herself. Little did she know that in just a few hours her dusty shoes would step into a new life, a life she never thought she would have the chance to touch. Jonah's carriage rolled into the valley as darkness began to fall. The air was thick, carrying a chill from the Wind River Mountains. Evelyn sat still, eyes wide, as she took in the first glimpse of the place she would soon call home. Ridgewell Farm was small but sturdy. The dark brown wooden house stood in the middle of a large plot, its long porch and small windows slightly yellowed from the oil lamp inside. To the left were the chicken coop and the goat pen. A little further back there was the shadow of a woodshed and a simple horse corral. Beyond, the pine forest stood close together like a dark green wall protecting the land from the wild winds. Evelyn felt a slight shiver, partly from the cold but mostly from the nameless thrill of facing the place she would live, the place where she would try to find a life that had long since fallen apart. Jonah pulled on the reins, and the carriage stopped in front of the porch. He turned to look at her, his voice calm and gentle as if talking to a horse frightened by thunder. "Here I come." Evelyn nodded slightly. "Thank you." "Ah, Jonah." He nodded as if confirming that the transition was natural. As Evelyn stepped onto the ground, the door of the house opened slightly. A small boy, about 7 years old, with messy dark brown hair and eyes as black as an old well, stood hidden behind the doorframe. His face was thin but bright with a docile and slightly worried expression. "That is definitely Simon." Jonah stepped forward, took off his gloves, and said in a soft but firm voice, "Simon, this is Evelyn. She..." will be with us." The boy looked at Evelyn for a moment. He didn't run or run away. He just stood there, his big eyes searching her as if trying to figure out if the stranger brought cold or warmth. Evelyn didn't try too hard. She knew children were quick to perceive things. She just bowed her head slightly and smiled. "Hello, Simon. Nice to meet you." The boy did not answer, but his eyes softened. Evelyn recognized the first sign of acceptance, however small. Jonah grabbed Evelyn's bag and gestured for her to go in first. The wooden door opened, and the smell of warm pine, the lingering scent of stew from their dinner, and the faint scent of smoke from the kitchen made Evelyn feel like she had stepped into a place that didn't belong anymore. The house was simple but warm. A wooden table near the stove, a few handmade chairs, a wooden shelf by the wall with a few old Bibles, an oil lamp burning yellow. A deerskin spread at his feet. Everything was neat, showing the somewhat lonely orderliness of a man who had lived for many years without a woman in the house. Evelyn placed her hands on the arm of a nearby chair gently, as if afraid to break anything. "This place is more beautiful than I thought." Jonah took his hat off the wooden hook and replied in a discreet but warm voice, "I built each bar myself. It's not perfect, but it keeps me warm." "You," Evelyn paused, correcting herself. "Jonah built it alone, yes." 5 years. The sentence was not long, but it was enough for Evelyn to imagine the process, the wind whipping at his shoulders, his hands bleeding the long winter, the silence that tightened in the chest of a man who lost his wife but still had to stand up for his young child. Such a man not easily defeated, but also not easily opened up. Evelyn understood that. Jonah pointed to the small wooden stairs that led to the mezzanine. "Your room is up there. Not big, but warm. I left the fire burning this afternoon." Evelyn looked at him, then at his calloused hands. She wondered when anyone had last prepared a room for her. It had been too long. "Thank you, brother." The word brother came out softly but sounded more natural than sir. Jonah paused, but didn't object. "You can call it that." Simon stood by the door, still watching them with his mysterious, childish gaze. Evelyn stepped closer, keeping her distance so as not to feel pressured. "Do you like it here, Simon?" The boy blinked, thought for a moment, then nodded slightly. "It gets windy here in the winter," Jonah explained. "But Simon's used to it. He likes to hear the pines." Evelyn looked out the window. Outside, the tall pine trees swayed gently in the wind. Needles fell here and there like stray fragments of memory. "The pines," she repeated. "It sounds like the whisper of the earth." Jonah looked at her a beat longer. Few people can say that. The air in the room softened. A moment later, Jonah pointed toward the kitchen. "Do you want something to eat?" "I left some beef soup. It's still hot." Evelyn shook her head. "I'm fine. Tomorrow morning is fine. The road is so long. You must be tired. I've been more tired." She smiled thinly. "But this time it feels different. I feel at peace." Jonah did not reply, but there was something in his eyes that moved like a gentle touch to the deepest part of the human soul. A moment of silence passed, warm, unforced. Finally he said, "We'll get up early tomorrow. There are a few things you need to know. How to start a fire, where to put the water, where to put the firewood. Winters here are tough." "I can learn," Evelyn replied. "I am not afraid of hard work." Jonah reached out and lifted the oil lamp, the light flickering on his face. "I know, because if you were scared, you wouldn't have come here." Evelyn stood still at those words. It felt as if someone had opened a small door that led to a place she had long locked. A wife without children is useless. A wife without children is useless. The words suddenly faded away, leaving only silence in Jonah's voice. Evelyn climbed the stairs. The small room revealed a wooden bed, a gray woolen blanket, and a small window overlooking the woods. The warmth of the fireplace wafted through the room, erasing the lingering feeling of dislocation from her shoulders. Putting down her bag, she slowly sat on the edge of the bed. Too much had happened today. And the strangest thing was that she didn't feel as scared as she thought she would when she got off the carriage. She touched the edge of the blanket and gently closed her eyes. Suddenly an image of the silent man standing under the porch wearing a wide-brimmed hat and standing as steady as an old pine tree appeared in her mind. A stranger, but it seems not completely distant. She sighed, her hand resting on her chest where her heart still pounded for reasons she couldn't name. Tomorrow would be the start of a new life, a new rhythm, a chance to see if her destiny was truly still unfolding. She whispered into the darkness, "God, please give me the strength to keep going. This time, please don't let me fall." Below, Jonah's footsteps padded across the living room. They were low and steady, a silent answer to her prayer. The first morning at Ridgewell Farm began with the wind rushing through the eaves like a sigh from the heart of the mountains. Evelyn woke to a misty morning, not accustomed to the light filtering through the small wooden windows instead of the loud sounds of Kansas. She sat up the wool blanket slipping off her shoulders, revealing the cold air against her skin. The room smelled faintly of burnt pine from the night before. Evelyn inhaled deeply, as if to capture that sense of peace, a feeling she had long forgotten. But in the peace, fear arises again. She put her hand to her belly out of habit. Running away from Kansas wasn't enough to erase the doctor's verdict. Your chances of getting pregnant are virtually zero. The word no never ceased to flow into her every thought, every heartbeat. It followed her like darkness clinging to the corner of a wall. She sat there for a long time until she heard the rustling of wood and the clanging of metal from downstairs. Jonah was lighting the fire. The sound was steady and steady, making the house seem to pulse with his life. Evelyn took a deep breath and stepped down. As she descended the stairs, the smell of black coffee wafted up, strong but warm. Jonah stood by the stove, his face turned to the fire, silhouetted in the dim light. His heavy gray cotton shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealed strong arms accustomed to cold winds and heavy work. He didn't come back immediately, but he knew she was down. "Good morning, Evelyn." His voice was deep and steady like a winter lake. "Good morning," she replied softly. Simon sat at the wooden table, his legs swinging slightly, his big round eyes looking at her shyly and with a hint of curiosity. Evelyn smiled, and for the first time Simon responded with a very slight nod. Jonah poured coffee into a ceramic cup with a small crack near the rim and handed it to her. "Drink this while it's warm. It got really low last night, probably only around 20 degrees. Is approximately equal to -6 degrees Celsius." Evelyn took the glass, the heat spreading into her hand. "Thank you. If you're not used to the mountain weather, it can be hard to breathe the first few days," he said, keeping his eyes on the fire. "But you'll get used to it." Evelyn looked at him. She wanted to ask something, but she didn't. Partly because she was embarrassed, partly because she was afraid she might ask the wrong thing. Afraid of upsetting him. Afraid of showing weakness. Jonah seemed to sense her awkwardness. He put the ladle back in the bowl, turned around, and leaned lightly against the kitchen counter. "Today I will show you how to light a fire so that the coals will last until morning. If you are not used to it, you will be awake all night because of the cold." Evelyn nodded slightly. "And how to test the water outside the well before drawing it. There was some ice last night," he continued. She took in every word, trying to focus on the concrete, the real. But the more she listened, the heavier her heart became. This farm needs a lot of things. An ordinary woman has a hard time. And can she handle it? Will Jonah regret it when he learns the truth? Evelyn swallowed the bitter taste in her throat. "Jonah," she began. He looked up, not in a hurry, not cold, just listening. She wanted to say it all, to explain, to confess, to free her heart from that heavy secret. But the image of Edward, the one who had called her useless, suddenly appeared. The old numbness resurfaced. "No, nothing." She bowed her head slightly. Jonah looked at her for a few seconds, his eyes weighing what she was not saying. But he did not press. "Okay, whenever you're ready." That calmness, like a gentle hand placed on a wound that doesn't want to be exposed. After a simple breakfast, Jonah led her outside. The wind was cold, but the morning sun made the air feel fresh. They stopped in front of the woodshed. Jonah showed her different kinds of wood times. Lodgepole pine burns quickly, warmly, but quickly goes out. Asterisk Douglas fir burns longer, suitable for long nights. Asterisk cottonwood should only be used when there are no other options. He picked up a branch of wood and tried to break it. There was a soft cracking sound. "You try to light the stove tonight. I'll stand by. If I do all the work, you won't learn anything." "Okay, I will," Evelyn replied. Jonah looked at her, the corners of his mouth slightly raised as if he wanted to smile but stopped. "Are you so sure about everything you say? I don't have much choice but to back down," she replied honestly. He was silent for a moment, then said, "Not everyone who comes here is as strong as you think. Mountain people cannot live on illusions. But I think you will get used to it." Evelyn wanted to believe him, but fear returned like a shadow. At noon, while Jonah went back over the hill to check the wind-blown fence, Evelyn cleaned up the kitchen. Simon stood near the door playing with an old wooden puzzle, glancing at her from time to time. Evelyn wanted to go closer, but she knew children were more sensitive than adults. They heard with their hearts more than their ears. So she made no noise. As she was washing the last dish, Simon suddenly walked over and placed a small item on the table next to her, an amber stone, round and smooth. Evelyn blinked. "I gave it to you." Simon said nothing, just nodded. She smiled slowly. "Thank you, Simon. I love it." The boy blushed and ran out the door, but Evelyn saw a glint of joy in his eyes, tiny but real, like a ray of sunshine through the clouds. She put the stone in her pocket, feeling the warmth spread from it. In the afternoon, as the light faded, Evelyn walked alone out into the field behind the house. The pine forest before her was as still as a painting. The sunset painted the treetops a burnt bronze color. She leaned against the wooden fence, her breath white in the wind. It's peaceful here. It's spacious here. Here no one knows what she's lost. But that secret was still there in her bones, waiting to rise up and destroy what she was trying to build. She pressed her hand to her stomach. A simple movement, but enough to make her heart clench. If Jonah knew, would he be as sad as Edward? Would he look at her with disgust? Would he regret choosing her? Light footsteps behind her brought her back to reality. Jonah approached, his hands still covered in dirt from mending the fence. "Are you okay?" His voice wasn't a hollow question, it was genuine concern. Evelyn turned back, half smiling. "I was just looking at the sky. It's cloudy today. The wind has changed direction. I think the first snow of the season may come early." Evelyn looked at him. It was just a few words about the weather, but she sensed something like quiet protection in them. Jonah stood beside her, not too close, not too far. That respect made her want to speak her mind more than ever. "Jonah," she called softly. He tilted his head, listening. Evelyn opened her mouth. Fear rose in her throat. She wanted to tell the truth, but her voice trembled. I have something I haven't told you." Jonah looked at her a long time. Not hasty, not cold, not judgmental. "Evelyn." His voice was low, slow, and heavy as stone. "When you are ready, I will listen. Not before. Not before." A simple word, but to Evelyn, it was like someone had just placed a warm blanket over her hidden wound. She turned away, her eyes meeting the last rays of sunset falling over the mountains. Inside her, the fear remained. But something else was growing, warm, light, and fragile as a sprout in the snow: faith. The fourth day at Ridgewell Farm began more gloomy than usual. No sunlight penetrated the thick clouds, and the wind blew harder from the west, carrying the scent of the coming snow. Evelyn wrapped a woolen scarf around her neck and stepped out onto the porch to check on the goats scurrying about the barn. She had gotten used to the routine, lighting the fire in the morning, filling the chicken troughs, chopping vegetables for the goats, and keeping the fire burning in the late afternoon. It was all new, but it also made her feel useful. For the first time in years, she felt like she was doing something that no one would criticize. Jonah was mending a section of fence in the distance. His sleeves were rolled up, his heavy cotton shirt hugging his shoulders, so strong that Evelyn couldn't help but stare at him for a moment longer before quickly turning away. Simon was sitting by the woodpile, carefully arranging the logs into the shape of a roof. He was quiet as he played, his eyes focused, his thick lashes drooping. Evelyn entered the goat pen. The largest female, Blanche, was rubbing her head against the side of the pen, begging for more food. Evelyn chuckled softly and ran her hand up the animal's back. "Wait a minute, I'll bring you some hay." She turned, intending to go back to the hayloft. But just then a noise behind her made her turn quickly. Simon, either out of curiosity or out of a desire to help, had unlatched the barn door, and Blanche, ever playful, leaned out, sending Simon staggering back. "Simon," Evelyn called, running over. The boy lost his balance and slipped on the ground, damp from the rain last night. He fell hard, his elbow hitting a small rock nearby, causing him to cry out in pain. The cry rang out like a knife in the otherwise peaceful air. Evelyn rushed over and knelt down beside him. "It's okay, Simon. Let me see." The boy clutched his arm, tears streaming down his face. A small tear appeared, and blood seeped out in a crimson red. Evelyn immediately tore off the inside of her undershirt, the cleanest piece of cloth she had, and gently bandaged the wound. "It's okay, honey. Just a scratch. It'll go away soon." But just then, from the farm gate came the voice of Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor who lived nearly 3 miles away and who often called in yesterday morning to exchange eggs or get some goat's butter. She stood with her hands on her hips, her red scarf fluttering in the cold wind. Her eyes fell on the sight of Evelyn holding the injured boy. "Good heavens," she exclaimed, "how can a woman without children know how to take care of a child? It would be foolish of Jonah to bring such a man home." Those words, light as wind but sharp as knife. Evelyn heard every word. Her heart stopped as if someone had squeezed a scar that had not yet healed. Simon fell silent, his eyes fixed on Mrs. Henderson in horror. Evelyn stood, rooted to the spot. The neighbor took a few steps forward, her voice not exactly malicious, but full of the critical quality typical of people who live too close to prejudice. "The boy fell. I think it was because you were not used to it. A woman who has never given birth. How can she have the instinct to take care of a child? God created each person as he wanted. Not everyone is blessed." The words, "unblessed," stabbed Evelyn in the back of her mind. Edward had used the exact same phrase. A long shadow fell across the yard. Jonah was standing right behind Mrs. Henderson. He said nothing for a few seconds, just looked at the wound on his son's arm, then at Evelyn. His eyes were not accusing but clouded with a moment of shock, not because of the wound but because Mrs. Henderson's words were beginning to connect the disjointed pieces he had not understood. Evelyn bowed her head. Her heart pounded like the galloping hooves of a horse fleeing through the woods. Jonah walked over, knelt down beside Simon and gently lifted the boy's hand to examine it. "It's not deep," he said in a calm voice, though there was a hint of tension in it. Then he stood up and looked at his neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. His voice was calm but as hard as walnut. "She's doing her best. Don't judge." Mrs. Henderson pursed her lips a little and walked away, but her words did what they were meant to do, sow doubt in the unspoken space. As soon as she was gone, Jonah turned back to Evelyn. But his eyes had changed. Not hot, not accusing, but the eyes of someone who had just found a strange piece of a puzzle he hadn't realized he'd left behind. "Evelyn," he said slowly, "is what she said true? The question is not big, not sharp, not heavy." But Evelyn felt it fall on her chest like a boulder sliding down a mountainside. She clutched the hem of her skirt. Her breath trembled like a thread stretched too tight to snap. She opened her mouth. "Jonah, there's one thing you can't have children," he asked again, his voice no higher than usual. But there was something in his eyes that made her feel as if she were standing on the brink. Evelyn froze. Her hands shook, her lips trembled, the whole world stopped in that moment. Finally, she exhaled softly, as if in confession, "I am not sure. The doctor in Kansas said that the accident that year made it difficult for me to get pregnant. Maybe never." Her voice broke on the word never. A long silence swallowed the two. Simon hugged her arm, his childish eyes not yet understanding but feeling the gravity of what was happening. Jonah looked at her for a long time, as if trying to connect what she had just said to the woman before him who had come here with brave eyes and a wounded heart. Finally, he just said, "Why didn't you say so earlier?" A slow, sad question. Not angry, but with a slight disappointment, like the faint sound of a door slightly closing. Evelyn looked down. "If I said, you wouldn't choose me?" Jonah was silent. Evelyn continued, "I'm scared. Scared of being abandoned again. Scared of being called a burden again. Scared of seeing the same look Edward gave me." At the mention of Edward's name, Jonah's expression did not change, but something in his shoulders sagged. He stroked Simon's hair, then looked back at Evelyn. "I'm not Edward." Evelyn bit her lip, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I don't want to lie to you either." "You're not fooling me," Jonah said. He sighed a sigh that sounded like wind through the forest, heavy but not extinguished. "You're just scared. I understand that. But Evelyn," his voice dropped, "the thing I hate most is not being able to say it. A touch right where the pain lies." She didn't know what to say. Her chest hurt. It hurt like the past was jogging across her ribs. Jonah stood still for a moment, then said, "We'll talk later. Let me take Simon inside." He picked up his son. He didn't look back at her again, and the moment the door closed behind him, Evelyn felt what she feared most taking shape. Distance. Distance is not measured in yards or miles. It's measured in broken trust. She stood in the middle of the yard, the cold wind whipping her face, and for the first time since coming to Sage Hollow, Evelyn found herself once again the woman no one had chosen. In the silence, she understood that the real breaking hadn't come yet. With the rain, the silence softened, but it was beginning. That night, the wind changed direction. From the Wind River Mountains, a cold wind blew down the valley, blowing against the wooden walls, making the Ridgewell house groan softly like the sigh of the earth. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, unable to sleep. She listened to the wind, the creaking of wood, the strange sound that blended into the darkness. Jonah's silence when the door closed that afternoon left no echo, but it left a void so vast that though the house was not large, Evelyn felt as if she were standing in a meadow where no one could hear her breathing. She didn't cry, not because she was stronger, but because she had cried enough times in her life to know that tears rarely helped. But the feeling of destroying something good that was brewing made her chest really hurt. She lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chest, but could find no warmth. The next morning, the weak sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the frosted glass. The Ridgewell house was unusually quiet. When Evelyn went downstairs, she found Jonah tying his shoes on the porch, getting ready to go out. Simon sat hugging his wooden mug, his eyes quieter than usual. Jonah heard her footsteps but said simply, "Good morning." "Good morning." Evelyn's voice was small and breathless. Jonah threw his thick leather coat over his shoulders, put on his hat, then turned back to Simon and said, "Dad's out back on the hill, checking the fence. Stay inside with Aunt Evelyn." Simon nodded slightly, not taking his eyes off the table. Jonah didn't look at Evelyn again before walking out. The door closed, leaving a long silence between the two remaining people. Evelyn poured some coffee to steady her shaking hands, but the heat did nothing to calm her. She tried to smile at Simon as she placed the cornflakes on the table. "Eat something." The boy merely looked up, not avoiding her, but his eyes seemed uncertain. He wasn't afraid of her, Evelyn could sense that, but he sensed the atmosphere between their father was different. Children sense that more quickly than adults. A moment later, Simon spoke first, his voice low and hoarse. "I'm not angry." Evelyn paused. "You think so?" The boy nodded. "Dad only stays quiet when he's sad." A simple sentence, but it stabbed Evelyn's heart like a cold needle. She sat down at the table, placing her hands on the rough old wood. "Simon, are you afraid of me?" The boy shook his head vigorously. "No." Evelyn let out a soft, shaky breath. She rubbed her hands together, trying to keep from breaking. "What happened yesterday wasn't your fault. It wasn't her fault either," he said, perhaps something Jonah had taught him. Children mirror their father's hearts. The boy's words made Evelyn's eyes sting. She placed her palms on her knees, telling herself that just a few more days would fix everything. She had to learn. She had to be worthy. She couldn't let the past ruin her future again. Jonah still hadn't come home by noon. Usually he was gone for a few hours, but today it had been longer, as if he needed some time away from home. Evelyn stood on the porch, looking out over the fields. The wind pushed the dry grass into gentle waves like the breath of the earth. She tightened her scarf around her neck, wondering, would he come back with the same look? Would he consider her a burden? Would he think she had lied? Those questions circled like a flock of crows. She remembered Edward's eyes. She remembered his cold voice. "If you can't give birth, you're not a woman." She was afraid to see that look again, from Jonah. But deep inside, a voice, faint but persistent: "Jonah is not Edward. Jonah is a man of the mountains, strong, silent, and just." Yet, old fears always find their way back. Jonah returned late in the afternoon as the sky began to darken. His shoes were muddy, his leather jacket caked with a thin layer of snow. Evelyn went to open the door, but Jonah avoided her eyes, only nodding slightly. "Thank you," he said, and went straight to washing his hands. Evelyn stood still for a moment. The distance was subtle but painfully real. That evening, the three of them ate together at the table. Simon muttered something about drawing a horse while Jonah was gone. Jonah smiled slightly at his son, but when Evelyn offered him more cornflakes, he simply replied, "Thank." Not cold, not harsh, but lacking the warmth that had formed a few days ago. Evelyn sat at the corner of the table, trying to swallow each bite of dinner without letting the weight in her heart shatter the fragile peace. After dinner, when Simon had gone to bed, Jonah stood by the fireplace, his hand resting on the iron fire stick. The firelight fell on his face, revealing the lines of fatigue. Evelyn stood in the middle of the room, her hands clasped together. "Jonah," Her voice was small but clear. "I'm sorry." He turned back. Not cold, not angry, but with the gravity of someone trying to understand something deeper than words. "Evelyn, I'm not angry about the children," he said slowly and firmly. "I'm angry because you think I'll abandon you if you tell the truth." A shiver ran down Evelyn's spine. I don't know what you'll think," she stammered. "I'm scared." "I know," Jonah replied. "But I need the truth. I don't want important things hidden. I've lost too much to silence." A heavy sentence like a rock falling into a lake, making Evelyn's heart waver. She lowered her face. "I'm not used to being trusted anymore." Jonah looked at her for a moment. The room fell silent. The silence of the mountains. The silence of two wounded hearts. Finally he exhaled. "We'll talk more when we're both calmer." "Not tonight." Evelyn understood that he did not refuse her, but she could not move closer. The gap is still there, but it's no longer a chasm of despair. It's more like a slope that takes time to climb. She nodded slightly. "Yes." Jonah put out the fire and went back upstairs. "Good night, Evelyn." His voice was no longer cold, only tired and sad. Evelyn stood in the middle of the empty room, listening to the wind howling outside, and for the first time since arriving here, she clearly felt what she feared, losing most Jonah. And the little home had not yet taken shape. She sat down on a wooden chair near the fireplace, pressed her hands to her face, and whispered, "Please don't let me ruin this, God." But even as she prayed, her heart knew the ordeal had only just begun. The next morning the sky over Sage Hollow was a leaden gray. Thick clouds hung low enough to touch. Evelyn pulled her scarf tight around her neck as she stepped out into the yard. The cold air flushed her cheeks. She was about to go to the well to draw water as usual when the sound of hooves from the farm gate stopped her. A rider approached, sitting upright, his long cloak blowing in the wind. The dark brown horse blew white steam from its nostrils as it breathed. The man on the horse wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low so that it hid most of his face. But one glance at his figure and the way he sat in the saddle made something in Evelyn clench. No, it can't be him. It can't be now. But as he approached and raised his head, Evelyn felt her knees give way. Lucas Hale, the man who had ruined her life. The man who had coldly announced that he was canceling their engagement because of a useless woman. The man who had turned his back on her family. The man who had forced her to leave Kansas, leaving behind everything that was once familiar. He stopped his horse in front of her, tilted his head, his eyes narrowed with triumph and complacency. "Evelyn Marlowe." His voice was long, velvety, but full of venom. "I expected to find you in a place as shabby as this." She didn't answer. Her hands clenched the bucket, rope so tight her knuckles turned white. "What are you doing here, Lucas?" Her voice was hoarse. He smiled the smile that had once scared Evelyn so much that she couldn't sleep for many nights. "I came to take you home. I think you still have the land your father left you. They say in Kansas that land can be rented, and it will fetch a good price for corn next season." He lifted his chin. "Sign it to me and you'll be free from this nest." Evelyn took a step back. "That is my land. You have no right." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What rights do you think you have? Unless you actually have a husband." His voice emphasized the word really, like a knife piercing straight into her wound. Just then, footsteps sounded from the porch. Jonah appeared tall and imposing in the cold gray morning light. He stood tall, his hand resting lightly but firmly on the edge of the wooden post, his eyes focused on the stranger. "Who are you looking for?" Jonah asked, his voice low and even without a trace of confusion. Lucas turned in his saddle, a half smile on his face. "Jonah Ridgewell. I've heard about you. The widower living alone on this hill." Jonah did not reply, his eyes sharpened a bit. "And this," Lucas turned back to Evelyn, "is the woman I'm about to take home." Jonah walked down the steps, slow but strong. He stopped right beside Evelyn, not taking her hand, but his presence was enough to make Evelyn feel she was not alone. "She's not going anywhere," Jonah said. Lucas laughed loudly, the sound dragging a knife across the wooden table. "You think she belongs to you? You think she can give you what you want?" He glanced at Evelyn, his eyes malicious. "Do you know what kind of woman she is?" Evelyn felt cold. She didn't want Jonah to hear that. "Not like this." "Lucas, don't." But it was too late. He spoke loudly and clearly. Each word seemed to intentionally stab her in the chest. "She is a woman who cannot have children. The doctor said so. I broke off the engagement with her because I don't need an..." Empty woman. The air froze. The wind stopped. The woods stood still. Evelyn's heart clenched. Jonah looked at Lucas, but his eyes never left Evelyn for more than a beat. Then he turned to the other man, his voice colder than ever. "Get off my land." Lucas snorted. "I'll be back. Wyoming law doesn't protect you, Jonah. I have papers and I have witnesses." He looked down at Evelyn, his smile curving into a slit. "You know I mean it. That land is money. I'm going to get it one way or another." Then he jerked the reins, turned the horse, leaving deep hoof prints on the cold ground. When he left, a heavy silence fell. Evelyn stood, rooted to the spot, her arms hanging limply, feeling as if all the air had been sucked from her lungs. Jonah said nothing for a few seconds. He just looked at her, a look without judgment, without pity, but full of thought. Evelyn bowed her head. "I'm sorry. I didn't want you to know this way." Jonah clenched his jaw, his eyes considering something deeply. "Evelyn, you should have said so." "I know," she gasped. "But Lucas, he wasn't just someone who abandoned me. He knew how to make me feel worse than nothing." "Everyone has a past," Jonah said, his voice low. "But I don't like it when people use it to threaten you." Evelyn looked up. There was no anger in Jonah's eyes at that moment. Only restraint. "We must be careful with him," he continued. "When a person loses what they consider their rights, they will do anything to regain them. You think he will come back?" Jonah looked back toward the road leading out of town where the hoof prints were fresh. "I'm sure he'll be back." Evelyn felt her head turn slightly, the old fear rising again. "Jonah, if he affects you and Simon." Jonah turned to her, his voice low but strong. "Evelyn, you didn't cause this. Don't take it all on yourself." She bit her lip, tears welled up but did not fall. No one had ever told her that. She turned away, trying to regain her composure. "In Kansas, I was always a burden. I was afraid I would be like that again." Jonah answered immediately without thinking. "You are not a burden." The statement made Evelyn freeze. In her life, few people said that to her with all their heart. Jonah breathed softly, as if trying to find the right words, but Lucas is the type of man who doesn't give up easily. I won't let him hurt you, or hurt this family. Evelyn looked up, eyes narrowed with emotion. "This family." Jonah paused, then nodded. "Yes, family." A gentle breeze blew by, carrying a bit of warmth from the late afternoon sun. Not much, but enough to make Evelyn feel she wasn't alone. But the peace only lasted until evening. While the three were having a simple dinner of pea soup, the news spread like wildfire in town. "Lucas enters the tavern. Says Evelyn was his fiancée. Says she ran away. Says he's here to reclaim what's his." And the crowd, which lives on rumors, began to whisper. Those whispers would reach Ridgewell Farm in a day or two. Evelyn didn't know. Jonah didn't know. But Sage Hollow is about to make waves. And Lucas, with a cold smile and eyes as hard as stone, had begun to set a new trap. A trap is not just for taking land, but also to destroy the life that Evelyn had just touched, not yet had a firm grasp of. That afternoon, the wind suddenly picked up. Cold gusts swept through Sage Hollow, swirling the dry grass like long shadows from the past. Evelyn stood by the window, the uneasiness in her chest growing stronger. Jonah had been quieter than usual since morning. He worked tirelessly, fixing the hinges on the stable door, deepening the irrigation ditch, gathering firewood to bring into the house. Everything he did was in preparation for the storm that was brewing, not just the snow outside, but the storm that was about to come into their lives. As the sky grew gray and the temperature dropped to the bone, Evelyn took her thick coat and went out into the front yard to collect the linens. But as she stepped out, a bright light from the steep road leading into town stopped her. It wasn't sunlight, it was the glint of metal. Another rider. A stranger. Not Lucas. But this one brought a letter. The Sage Hollow postman, Mr. Creighton, stopped his horse at the gate and bowed his hat cautiously. "Mrs. Ridgewell?" he asked. The question startled Evelyn slightly. She was not used to the title. I'm Evelyn," she replied without correcting herself. "I bring news from town." He held out a thick sheet of paper, stamped with the seal of the small town hall. Evelyn opened it. There weren't many lines, but each word seemed to pierce deep. "There is a complaint against Jonah Ridgewell for leaving land fallow for 3 years. Need to appear in court tomorrow morning. Applicant Lucas Hale." Evelyn felt a slight dizziness in her head. "No, it can't be. Jonah didn't leave this land. He brought 2 witnesses, Mr. Creighton sighed and said softly, the townspeople are beginning to believe him. Evelyn squeezed the paper so hard that a small tear came out of the folded edge. Thank you. Her voice trembled, but she remained polite. The postman nodded and turned his horse to leave before the snow fell any heavier. Jonah returned as the first snowflakes began to fall. He brushed the snow off his shoulders and stepped onto the porch. When he saw Evelyn standing there clutching the indictment in her hands, he knew what had happened. What did the town send? His voice dropped. Evelyn said nothing, just handed him the paper. Jonah read it, his lips pursed until they turned white. Lucas did it, he said softly, as if to himself. He got it going faster than I thought. Jonah. What should we do? Evelyn asked, her voice low and worried. He did not answer immediately. His eyes were on the road leading to town where the snow was beginning to cover the ground. Each flake fell from the roofs, from the courtyards, like signs of a war he had not chosen but was forced to face. I have to go to court, he said finally, but the blizzard is coming. Evelyn protested. Simon needs you. Home. Jonah looked at her, his blue-gray eyes determined. If I don't go, this land will be lost. This house will be lost. The future of the 3 of us will be lost. Evelyn was silent. As the wind picked up, Jonah prepared his horse. He wrapped his thick cloak around it, tied the saddle, and tightened the reins. All in silence. Not the silence of anger, but the silence of someone burdened with a responsibility greater than a man's life. Evelyn stepped forward, grabbing his sleeve. Jonah, don't go alone. I can come with you. He shook his head. You're not used to driving in a storm, and I won't put you in danger. But Evelyn, he said, his voice low but firm as stone, you stay home with Simon. That's enough. That statement is not rejection. It is trust. Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat. So, you promise to come back? Jonah looked her straight in the eyes. There was no fire in them like on a sunny day, but the determination of someone who knows he must stand no matter how shaky the ground beneath his feet. I will return, he said firmly. At all costs. Evelyn couldn't help it. She reached out and put her hand on his arm. Jonah, I don't want to lose this place. Don't want to lose. She paused, her heart skipping a beat. Lose you. Jonah paused. He didn't respond verbally, but he reached out a calloused hand and placed it on her trembling one. A brief touch, but deeper than any promise. He mounted his horse as the blizzard began to turn black. Snowflakes as large as dried flower petals tapped against his coat. Simon stood on the porch, his dark eyes wide, his hands clutching the porch post. Dad, the boy called softly. Jonah bent down and touched his son's head. Stay inside. Listen to Evelyn. Simon nodded, his eyes welling with worry. Jonah turned to Evelyn, locked the door. Don't go out. The storm may die down by late tonight. I'll be back before the snow covers the streets. Evelyn stood on the porch, holding her arms to steady herself. Her voice was choked. Jonah, be careful. He nodded. Then he kicked his horse. The horse let out a low neigh, galloping into the whiteness of the blizzard. Evelyn ran a few steps into the yard, the wind whipping her face. Jonah's silhouette faded and vanished into the thick snow as if he were being swallowed up by the mountain. She stood there for a long time, until her hands were numb, until the wind blew her tears back, until darkness began to cover the roof. Night fell sooner than usual. The blizzard howled through the woods, tearing at the wooden walls as if it were tearing them apart. Inside the house, Evelyn lit a fire twice more to keep Simon and herself warm. The boy sat close to her, his head resting on her shoulder, carrying a warm but fearful breath. Miss Evelyn, Simon said softly, Father will be back. Right. Evelyn looked at the flickering flames. They made no promises, only danced and flickered as if trying to hold on to hope. Your father is the strongest man I know, she whispered. He will come back. She said so. To Simon. And to herself. But every time the wind blew through the cracks in the door, every time the snow fell heavily and hit the roof, her heart tightened as if it was being squeezed in someone's hands. The fear for Jonah wasn't like the fear of losing Edward. It was deeper, more real, more painful. Because Jonah is not just a place for her to rely on. He is becoming a place where her heart begins to find warmth, and the thought of him alone in the blizzard nearly took her breath away. She held Simon closer, looked out the steamy window, and prayed silently, Jonah, Please, come back. But outside, the sky only responded with a long howl like a hopeless call from the pine trees on the mountainside. The wind changed direction 3 times that night. Each time it shifted, it was like a jolt that made Ridgewell House shake slightly on the frozen ground. Evelyn sat close to the fire, her eyes fixed on the door. Simon fell asleep in her lap, his head propped on his arm, his breathing even but startled by the howl. Outside, the sky was so white it looked as if the whole world had been painted in the coldest color of creation. Part of Evelyn wanted to run outside and find Jonah, but the other part, the fragile but persistent part of her mind, knew she'd be lost after just a few steps in that whiteness. She'd seen snow in Kansas before, but the snow in Wyoming was different. It was deep, fierce, and terrifyingly silent. She hugged Simon tighter, whispering as if talking to herself, "Jonah will come back." He promised. But as the old clock on the wall struck 12, marking midnight, Evelyn felt her insides twist. Where is he? Did he fall? Is he too cold to get up? She had never been so scared, because what she was afraid of losing was no longer a roof over her head or a marriage certificate, but a man calm, quiet, but warm in a way that changed her whole life. Around midnight, Simon suddenly opened his eyes. "Miss Evelyn." "Will the wind break the tree?" She stroked his hair. "Sometimes, but our house is solid. Jonah built it well. My father always did everything to make sure that we wouldn't be afraid," Simon said, his lips moving as if he would cry at the slightest touch. Evelyn hugged the boy to her chest. She didn't know what to say except, "Your father is trying to come back to us." The night stretched on like a never-ending road. When a faint light appeared behind the mountains, not the sun, just a sky silvered by snow, Evelyn stood up. She heard something, very faint, very far away. The sound of horse hooves, or just the wind. Simon woke up and rubbed his eyes. "What did you hear?" Evelyn tilted her head, listening. Her heart was pounding. This time it was clearer, the sound of iron hooves hitting the frozen ground. "Jonah," she gasped, then rushed for the door. The cold wind whipped at her face, but she felt nothing. She ran down the stairs and across the snow-covered yard, her boots sinking in with each step. In the distance, where the road faded into white, a swaying silhouette of a horse appeared. And on its back, a person. Jonah. But he was not as steady as usual. He sat crooked, one hand on the horse's flank, the other holding on to the saddle, swaying as if a little stronger wind would make him fall. "Jonah," Evelyn shouted, her voice breaking in the wind. The horse heard the man and struggled to move. Its front legs collapsed right in the yard. Jonah slipped from the saddle and fell into the snow. Evelyn rushed forward, knelt down, and lifted his head. Jonah's face was gray with cold. His breath came in thin wisps. "Jonah, can you hear me?" She shook his shoulder gently. Jonah opened his eyes. His blue-gray vision was blurry, but he recognized her. "Evelyn," he said softly, his voice like it was flowing through stone. "I'm home," she choked. He kept his word, even at the cost of his own life. "Where are you?" "Hurt." She examined him. His left arm was bruised. His wrist was sprained. The membrane of his coat was torn at the shoulder, the skin beneath scraped from hitting the rocks. "The storm was so bad," Jonah whispered. "The road down the pass was blocked. I took too long to circle." She bit her lip to keep from crying. "Don't talk. Come inside. Now," Evelyn shouted for Simon to bring her a blanket. The boy came running, pale but determined. Together, the two aunts and nieces pulled Jonah onto the porch, closing the door just as a strong wind whipped through as if it would tear the house apart. Inside, Evelyn built a big fire. She pulled a chair close to the hearth and sat Jonah down. Heat rose, painting his pale cheeks red. Simon stood beside him, his eyes filled with tears. "What happened, Dad?" Jonah put his hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm fine. Just tired." Evelyn took a warm towel and gently wiped the mud from his face. With each touch, her heart clenched, as if trying to embrace everything he had just been through. She said while wiping, "You could have died out there." Jonah looked up, his eyes as deep as the shadows of the mountains. "But I promise I will return. A promise isn't worth your life." Evelyn burst out, her voice breaking. Jonah was silent. She had never heard her voice shake so much. After a moment he whispered, "I can't let Lucas take our land." She paused. "Ours," Jonah sighed, the heat from the stove brightening his eyes. "Evelyn, I've been meaning to say this for days, but then, It all happened so fast. Her heart was pounding. What? Jonah. He pursed his lips as if gathering the most difficult things to say in his life. If Lucas takes this land, you, Simon, and I have nowhere to go. I can't let that happen. Jonah took a deep breath and continued, not just because it's our duty, not just because of the law, but because I need you here. Evelyn stood frozen. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Jonah looked her straight in the eyes, his voice small but firmer than anything she had ever heard. Evelyn, you are not a burden, not a pity. You, he breathed slowly, are the part I want to protect. A tear slid down Evelyn's cheek. Not a tear of fear like the years before. Not a tear of shame of someone scorning her, but a tear of hearing something she thought she could never deserve. She put her hand over her mouth. Jonah, you have no idea how scared I was. I know, he said, and I was scared too. Scared that I wouldn't be able to protect you. Scared that you'd think I was like him. Him, she asked softly. Lucas. Jonah's voice was as low as a stone in a river. I'm not him. I won't leave you. Not for any reason. Evelyn could bear it no longer. She sat down beside him, her trembling hands resting on his calloused ones. Jonah, I can't have children. I don't know if I can give you what you want most. Jonah squeezed her hand gently, his eyes softer than the fire. Evelyn, I had a child, and I loved him more than life itself. He looked at Simon, then back. But a home isn't built on children alone. It's built on trust. On two people, standing together. She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking slightly. You have no idea what that means to me. I know, Jonah said softly, because I see it in your eyes. She cried, not loudly, just sobs caught in her throat. Jonah raised his other hand and placed it on her cheek. The warmth of his hand seemed to cut through the cold she had carried with her from Kansas. Evelyn, I came back, not for this land. He said each word slow as the sound of the mountains. I came back for you. She choked. Jonah. He raised his eyebrows slightly, the corners of his lips curling up slightly as if he was holding back a smile. But if you keep crying like that, I will think you don't want me to survive another trip. She laughed through her tears. It was soft, shaky, but it was the first laugh she'd had since coming to Sage Hollow. When Simon fell asleep again, Evelyn sat beside Jonah for a long time. She bandaged his wound, cooked some porridge. Sometimes Jonah closed his eyes, but his hand still held hers as if afraid that if he let go, this dream would disappear. Outside, the wind was still howling, the snow was pounding against the walls, rumbling like the heart of a storm. But inside, for the first time in years, Evelyn felt like she belonged somewhere. Not by marriage, not by duty, not by the past, but because of the heart of a man who saw her, really saw her under all the layers of fear. And choose to stay. The night slowly fades. The wind dies down. A thin layer of snow drifts through the pine trees. Evelyn turned to Jonah. He was sleeping, his breathing more even. His face in the firelight looked tired but peaceful. She whispered, Jonah, thank you for coming back. And in the silence of the mountain house, she knew clearly, there are confessions that sometimes don't need to be said, because they appeared in every gesture, every look, every warm silence between two people who both carried too many wounds. The morning after the snowstorm was a pale light over Sage Hollow. Snow covered the roofs, the fences, the path to town. But inside the Ridgewell house, the hearth still burned, giving off a steady warmth. Jonah was still sleeping, breathing deeper than last night. Evelyn had changed the bandages around his shoulders and knees in the early hours, her hand shaking slightly but firmly, as if one slip could send him into some long sleep she couldn't summon. Evelyn stood and looked at Jonah for a long time. His face in the thin morning light had the familiar firmness but was softened by fatigue. If one did not know the story behind it, one might think he was just a working man who had just had a long day in the mountains. But Evelyn knew that wasn't true. He fought his way back. She looked at his hand, large, calloused, strong on the wool blanket. It was the hand that had pulled her out of her fear more than once. It was the hand she had once thought she would never hold, never dreamed she would touch with such peace as she did today. A warm feeling spread through her chest, mixed with gratitude, and something deeper. She bent down and whispered softly, "You have to live." Jonah. Just then he stirred slightly. His eyelids opened slowly and with difficulty. Evelyn jerked upright. "You're awake. Are you hurt anywhere?" Jonah looked at her, his eyes dim but warm. "You're still here," he said softly. The words nearly choked Evelyn. "Of course I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Jonah tried to lift himself up, but she put her hand on his shoulder, holding him back. "Don't. I can't sit up yet. I have to check on the horses. And the fence after the storm." He braced himself on the edge of the chair. "No," Evelyn said quickly, then softened her tone. "No one is making you do anything today. Just breathe. Like this. That's enough." Jonah sank into a chair. He looked up at the ceiling for a moment, then back at Evelyn. "Are you worried about me? I'm so worried." She didn't hide it anymore. In that moment, Jonah looked at her with a look she had never seen before. Not gratitude, not responsibility, but sincerity. Like the earth cracking open to reveal water deep within. After feeding Simon breakfast, Evelyn brought Jonah a basin of warm water to wash his face. He sat back in his chair, his face flushed from the heat. "Yesterday," she whispered as she handed him the towel. "If you hadn't come back—" "Don't think so," Jonah interrupted lightly. "The important thing is that I'm back." Evelyn swallowed back a sob. "Yes, you're back." But in her heart a deeper worry remained. Lucas was still out there, and he hadn't given up just because of the blizzard. As if reading her thoughts, Jonah continued, "He'll be back, Lucas." His voice was low and even but sharp as a saw blade. "Do you think he will come to the house?" Evelyn asked. "Sooner or later," Jonah answered bluntly. "A man like him doesn't accept defeat, and he thinks he has power over you, which makes him even more dangerous." Evelyn clenched her hands together. "I do not belong to him." "I know," Jonah replied softly, "but he doesn't know that." The statement made the room a little colder, though the fireplace was still burning brightly. Jonah continued, "I have to go back to town when the wind dies down. I have to untangle the trap he set in court. I have proof that I haven't left this land in 3 years. Dozens of people know." "Then how dare he do that?" Evelyn asked, her voice filled with fear and hatred. "Because he thought I was the type of person who lived alone. No one spoke up for me." Jonah looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if remembering. "Before you came." He might have been right. Evelyn slowly sat down beside him, her palms resting on his knees. "So that means you're not alone anymore." Jonah looked at her hand, small and shaking, but placed on his like a pledge. "Not now." A warm silence fell between them. By noon the sky had cleared. The snow covered the yard, making it blindingly bright. Simon wanted to go out and make snow, but Jonah shook his head. "Let the wind die down." The boy frowned but obeyed, then sat next to Evelyn and drew a horse in charcoal. When he was done, he turned the paper over and handed it to Jonah. "Dad, I draw you." Jonah looked at the drawing, a man standing next to a horse in the snow, his hat askew but his expression strong. "Is Dad handsome?" Simon asked. Jonah placed his hand on his son's head. "The most beautiful I've ever seen." Evelyn looked at the two of them, and a sense of peace washed over her. Just a minute, a precious minute, because she knew the bad things weren't over. As the afternoon wore on, Evelyn went out back to gather firewood. The wind had died down and the air smelled of damp pine and cold snow. She gathered a few logs and returned to the house. But as she stepped onto the porch, she saw Jonah standing there, his hands braced against the doorframe, his face tense. "What are you doing here? You're still in pain." "I hear a carriage," Jonah whispered. "Carriage?" Evelyn was startled. He nodded. "Not Lucas. Lighter driving. Probably someone from town." She held her breath. "Who do you think?" Jonah looked out onto the street, his sharp eyes seeming to judge from afar what others had not seen. When a man like Lucas spreads rumors, there will be people who listen, or people who are curious, or people who want to cause trouble. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine, even though the wind had died down. A moment later, a bell rang. A small cart appeared. Its wheels sank deep into the snow, shaking slightly as it drove up to the gate. The coachman was Sheriff Mathis, the town sheriff. Evelyn looked at Jonah. His gaze was unchanged, calm but wary. Sheriff Mathis jumped down, brushing snow from his coat. He was an older man in his 50s, with deep-set eyes and a usually fair disposition. But today his face looked uncomfortable. "Jonah," he greeted first. "Sheriff," Jonah replied. Mathis looked at Evelyn for a moment, then said, I came to warn you so you could be prepared. Lucas Hale is running the town wild with word. He hired 2 strangers to be false witnesses. He's saying Evelyn is his, and you stole her." Evelyn paled. "That's not true. I left Kansas on my own." Mathis held up a hand to reassure him. "I know, but people in bars don't need the truth. They want something to talk about." Jonah clenched his jaw. "So who do you believe?" "I believe you, Sheriff," Mathis replied shortly. "You live here better than 10 people talking in that tavern combined." Jonah nodded slightly as a thank you. Mathis continued. "The trial is in 2 days, but I warn you, Lucas is not simple. He seeks both your land and your honor, and he wants to discredit Evelyn. He wants her back in Kansas." Evelyn clenched her fists so hard her nails dug into her skin. "I'm not going back," she said firmly. Mathis nodded. "I believe you, but Lucas won't stop. You and she need to prepare a thorough statement." Jonah stood a little straighter, though his shoulders still hurt. "I'm ready." Evelyn looked at Jonah. He didn't speak loudly, but his voice carried like an echo off the mountains. Mathis took off his hat and prepared to leave. Before getting in the car, he turned back. "Jonah, I know you don't want trouble, but this is a harsh land. Those who don't protect themselves will be devoured. You have Evelyn. You have Simon. Don't let Lucas take what you worked so hard to build." With that, he left, leaving the yard quiet. Evelyn stepped beside Jonah. "You'll have to go to court again." Jonah looked at the white snow spread out before him. "Yes." His voice was slow and clear. "And this time, I won't let him touch you, not even with words." Evelyn paused. "Jonah, what do you mean?" He turned and looked at her for a long moment. "Evelyn, I will protect you, not just as a family member." His eyes were deep and sincere, but as someone I choose to stand beside. A hot current ran from Evelyn's heart to her throat. She opened her mouth, but the words stuck. And then Jonah added, like a promise, a boundary, a step beyond what they had both been silent about for too long. "You are not Lucas's abandoned past. You are the future here, with me." A gentle wind blew through the yard, not cold, not fierce, just like the breath of the mountains after a storm has passed. Evelyn bowed her head, her hands trembling in the air as if searching for something to hold on to. Then she spoke, her voice soft but firm as the pine tree behind the house. "I want to stand next to you too, Jonah." For the first time since she'd arrived in Sage Hollow, Jonah let a small smile appear, a rare one, but enough to make the house glow warmer than a fireplace. And Evelyn knew the next 2 days would be difficult. But for the first time she wasn't afraid to face them, because she had somewhere to stand, and someone to stand beside. The morning before the trial, Sage Hollow was a bleak silver gray. The wind had died down and the snow had stopped, but the sky was closed as if nature itself were holding its breath before the day of reckoning. Evelyn woke early despite having slept less than an hour the night before. The oil lamp on the wooden table still burned dimly from the night before. She sat alone for a long time, her hands clasped together, her thoughts drifting back to Kansas, where she had been humiliated, where she had been called worthless. But then she looked down at her hands. For the first time in her life, her fingers were shaking, not with fear, but with the truth. Jonah needed her. Not a perfect woman, not one who could bear children, but her flawed, fragile but standing tall. She whispered in the cold room, "I can't run anymore, God. Please give me the strength." Downstairs, Jonah sat at the table, his hands on his knees. He looked better than he had in days, though the bruise on his shoulder was still visible under his shirt collar. He looked up when he heard Evelyn coming down the stairs. Evelyn thought she would tremble, but when she saw Jonah, the trembling turned into something else, a warmth that calmed her heart. "Good morning," Jonah said, his voice low but full. "Good morning," Evelyn replied, then looked at Simon, who was holding a small Bible, his dark eyes worried. Jonah put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Your father and Aunt Evelyn have to go into town today. You stay home with Uncle Clay, he'll come over and watch you." Simon nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on his father. Evelyn stepped forward, kneeling down to the boy's level. "Are you all right?" The boy hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "I'm afraid. Lucas will hurt you more." Evelyn squeezed the boy's hand, her voice as soft as a bird's. "Your father is strong, and you know, he never fights alone." Jonah watched the scene, his eyes downcast with emotion. Evelyn saw something in his eyes at that moment, not a momentary gratitude, but a deep trust, like a mountain trusting its roots. Sheriff Mathis arrived on time. He stopped the carriage in front of the porch, shook the snow off his shoulders, and nodded. "Are you two ready?" he asked, his voice calm but a little tense. Jonah nodded. "We are ready." Evelyn wasn't sure she was ready, but when Jonah stepped out onto the porch and offered her a hand to help her down the steps, she knew just standing next to him would be enough. They climbed into the car. The sound of the tires on the snow was a steady, sharp, percussive sound, a sign of an impending storm. As the carriage pulled away from the farmhouse, Evelyn glanced back at the wooden roof. For the first time she saw it not as a temporary shelter, but as a home she would protect at all costs. The road down to town was covered with a thick layer of snow. Every pine tree, every chestnut branch, every wooden fence along the road was covered in a soft white layer. But the air in the car was more tense than on the road ahead. Sheriff Mathis was the first to break the silence. Lucas arrived first. He brought a few people from the tavern to make a splash. The two witnesses he hired apparently never set foot on your farm. Jonah clenched his jaw. "I know those types. They just say the right thing at the right time." Mathis nodded. "Yes, but don't let them get you into a rage. If you lose your temper, the court will rule in their favor." Evelyn looked at Jonah. He said nothing, but she knew he was struggling between wanting to protect her from Lucas and wanting to stay calm and win the case. A battle is sometimes not about fists, but about silence. She placed her hand lightly on the back of Jonah's hand, not holding, not pulling, just letting him feel. Jonah looked down at her hand, pursed his lips, and nodded slightly as if to say, "I understand. I'm here." The Sage Hollow Town Hall wasn't large, just a wooden house with an old tiled roof and small windows that shook slightly in the wind. But the air inside was so thick Evelyn felt like she could touch it. The townspeople sat in 2 rows of benches. No one spoke loudly, but every glance that passed her and Jonah was meaningful. Some sympathize. Some are curious. Some are judgmental. And then Lucas stood right near the court table. New, wide-brimmed, hat-cleaned coat, no longer the man who had just walked through a blizzard. He looked at Evelyn with a smile so thin it made her stomach clench. "We meet again, Eve." He spoke low, just loud enough for her to hear. Jonah moved a little closer to her. The proximity was enough to make Lucas lose his composure for half a second. But he quickly regained his composure. The trial began. Judge Pierce, a straight, gray-haired, older man, read the charges. Lucas Hale contends that Jonah Ridgewell abandoned the land for 3 years and thus lost his right to use it under the Wyoming Territorial Act of 1878. Mr. Ridgewell objected, saying that he had never left the land beyond the prescribed period. The judge looked at Jonah. "Do you have proof?" Jonah replied. "Yes." Lucas stepped forward. He smiled smugly. "I have proof, Your Honor." And 2 witnesses. 2 men stood up. Their faces were brazen and alien men willing to sell confessions for silver. Lucas continued. "Jonah Ridgewell, as everyone knows, lost his wife 3 years ago. He left home for a long time. The land was left fallow. I just want it to be put in the hands of someone who knows how to farm it." A murmur spread through the seats. Evelyn felt her blood run cold. He was trying to twist the truth to turn Jonah's pain into a reason to seize the land. Jonah did not respond. He stood straight, his face as hard as stone. The judge looked at the 2 witnesses. "Do you confirm what Lucas said?" They both nodded. "I saw his house empty for months." "Me too." Lucas raised his eyebrows triumphantly. Mathis stood up. "Sir, I request permission to call witnesses for Jonah." The judge nodded. "Call." Jonah turned to Evelyn. His eyes told her. This time, she had to stand. Mathis said loudly, "Evelyn Marlowe." The whole room turned to look at her. Her legs felt like they were ice, but Jonah put a hand on her back, warm and gentle. Evelyn stepped forward, each step as if stepping into a storm. The judge asked, "What do you have to say?" Evelyn looked straight at Lucas. He curled his lips, expecting her to tremble, but she did not tremble. Her voice was clear. "I was the one who left Kansas because of Lucas Hale. He broke off our engagement, humiliated me, and spread rumors that made me look like a loser. Today he's back to his old ways, lying, hiring people, smearing to get what he wants." The whole room was buzzing. Lucas widened his eyes. "You," Evelyn continued more forcefully, "he doesn't want this land for farming. He wants to control me. He wants me to go back to Kansas as a woman he has favored." The judge tapped his gavel. "Order." Evelyn Quay sang Jonah. Jonah Ridgewell didn't leave this land. He was here every day, every month. He kept it to raise his children. And for the past 3 years, even though he was in so much pain he thought he couldn't stand up, he didn't leave. Her voice softened. He is not the kind of man to abandon his land or his people. Mathis added, and I, Sheriff of Sage Hollow, confirm that. The judge looked at the file, then at Lucas's 2 witnesses. You two have something to say. The 2 men fumbled. One swallowed. The other avoided the judge's eyes. Lucas screamed. They're telling the truth. And she's just a woman I dumped. Jonah stepped forward. His voice was not loud, but it silenced the courtroom. I won't let you call her that again. Jonah's gaze was so sharp that Lucas took a step back. Judge Pierce banged his gavel. I've heard enough. The whole room held its breath. Finally, the judge said, Jonah Ridgewell holds the land. Lucas Hale, you are hereby fined for presenting a false witness. Lucas turned pale. He looked at Evelyn with venomous eyes. You will regret daring to defy me. But this time, Evelyn wasn't afraid, because Jonah was standing right next to her. And for the first time she said it straight to Lucas Hale's face. I don't run anymore. Never. The trial ended, but the air in the town was as thick as unmelted ice. People emerged from the courthouse whispering and looking back at Evelyn and Jonah, not with the contempt Evelyn had felt in Kansas, but with wonder and curiosity. Some even nodded to Jonah as if to confirm their trust in him. Sheriff Mathis put his hand on Jonah's shoulder. Very well, but go home. Lucas isn't the type to give up by losing in front of a crowd. Jonah nodded. I know. Evelyn stood beside him, her head bowed slightly. As Mathis walked out to the carriage, Jonah turned to her, touching her elbow lightly. Are you okay? She took a deep breath. I'm fine. Probably. But inside her a silent tremor still vibrated like an echo in a mountain cave. She had faced Lucas. She had spoken. She had said the words she had not dared to say. But it also stirred up memories, nights lying in her cramped room in Kansas listening to the whispers about her. Days when she had bowed her head and avoided eye contact for fear of being called the outcast. Today she stood firm. But her heart still trembled. Jonah looked deep into her eyes as if reading it. Evelyn, he said softly, you did well. Just one sentence, simple, but made her want to cry. Mathis drove them back. The town passed slowly outside the window saloon, blacksmith, drugstore, small grocery store. A few people waved to Jonah. An elderly woman nodded to Evelyn. An old man on the porch said, Mr. Ridgewell, you should marry that girl. I tell you the truth. Evelyn blushed. Jonah inclined his head slightly in thanks, but his eyes glanced at Evelyn for a moment. The glance made her heart skip a beat. She looked out, pretending not to hear anything. But Jonah heard. Jonah understood. And Jonah didn't ignore it. As the car passed the end of town, the sky darkened. Thick clouds rolled in low, as if the snowstorm last night was just a warning of something bigger to come. It's going to snow again, said Mathis. You two should hurry. The car rocked slightly as it went up the hill. No one said anything else. Evelyn sat between Jonah and Mathis, her arms clasped together. With each jolt, Jonah put his hand on the edge of the seat behind her to shield her from the wall. Small, unspoken cares, but enough for Evelyn to feel his presence like a thick coat. Nearly half an hour later, the outline of the farmhouse appeared in the white of the fields. Smoke rose from the chimney. Uncle Clay must have lit the fire for Simon. Mathis stopped the car. I'm going back to the station. If Lucas comes to cause trouble, you just light the flare. Jonah replied, I will keep quiet. Unless he touches my family. Mathis stared at him for a few seconds, then said, You're always a man of your word, Jonah. I just hope this time the promise doesn't come at too great a price. He drove away, leaving 2 people standing on the porch. Evelyn stood staring out at the white field before her, her breath rising in small puffs of smoke. Jonah stood just behind her, so close she could touch him if she took a step back. Are you cold? He asked. No, she replied, though her hand was already cold. Jonah looked at her for a moment as if considering something. Then he said, his voice slow and deep as a winter brook, Today, you did what not every woman dares to do. You faced the person who hurt you. I want you to know, I am proud of you. The wind seemed to die down as he said that. Evelyn didn't turn around. She was afraid that if she did, she would cry or say something uncalled for. Jonah, She spoke so softly that only the wind could hear. He stepped halfway, the distance between them closing. Evelyn. She closed her eyes for a second. Don't shake. Don't shake anymore. Are you scared? She asked. Jonah was surprised. Afraid of what? I'm afraid that I will bring trouble to you. He pondered for a moment. Then he said very simply, your problems are mine from now on too. She turned. Jonah's gaze was unwavering, unblinking, unmistakable. Clear, warm, deep, and true. That very look pushed her heart to the limit with no place to hide. Jonah, Evelyn said hoarsely, you make me feel worthless. His face softened. You were never worthless. I was abandoned, looked down upon, kicked out of my home. Lucas didn't leave you, Jonah interrupted, his voice low but strong. He just wasn't good enough for you. A warmth rose in Evelyn's chest like flames spreading from a fireplace swirling around her. She placed a hand on her chest, trying to calm the pounding of her heart, which was beating so fast she could hear it. Jonah, I don't know how you can see the good in me. I'm not the only one who saw it, Jonah said. Simon saw it. The whole town saw it today. And if you let me, I'll show you every day. The words sent a shiver through Evelyn's body, but not from fear, because she knew what he was saying wasn't flattery or empty promises. It was the words of a true Western man, quiet, but what he said was something he kept for life. She gathered all her remaining courage and said softly, you say it like you want me to stay here, with you. Jonah looked at her for a long time. Then he sighed softly, a deep breath from the bottom of his heart. Evelyn, I don't want to just protect you. I want to build with you. She touched his hand very slowly. Do I have any right to hope? That Jonah placed his other hand on hers, leaned slightly, and his voice was as low as moss on stone. From the moment you stepped off the first bus, you always had that right. Evelyn squeezed his hand. For the first time, she wasn't shaking. The door opened. Simon ran out, his face flushed from the warmth of the house. Dad, Aunt Evelyn, he shouted. Uncle Clay is making cornbread. Come in. Evelyn laughed, a soft, clear laugh like spring water. Jonah put his hand on her shoulder and helped her up the steps. Come in, he said, his voice warm as the fire in the house. She looked at him, her eyes softening. Yes, come in. They entered the house together, leaving behind the white fields and the haunting memories of the trial. Outside, the snow was falling again. But inside, warmth was rising, penetrating every corner, every breath. Evelyn knew she had never stood on such solid ground. And the man beside her was more than just a support. He was where she could start over. Snow melted slowly on the slope behind Ridgewell House. The first patches of grass peeked through the black earth, and the scent of pine needles wafted in the air. Sage Hollow's long winter had finally given way to light, not bright light, but the soft, low kind that made breathing easier after the long, harsh days. Evelyn stood on the porch, her hands cradling a cup of hot coffee, the warmth of it soothing her fingers. She looked out at the field where Jonah was instructing Simon to retie the pony's reins. The boy laughed when the horse sneezed, and Jonah laughed along, a low, round, rare laugh. The sight made Evelyn feel her chest expand, as if a great void in her heart had found something to fill. It had been 2 weeks since the trial, 2 weeks that Lucas had disappeared from town, or at least not dared to appear in public, 2 weeks that she and Jonah had learned to stand next to each other, not by force but by something as natural as breathing. And in those 2 weeks, they didn't rush to say anything more. They didn't rush to turn gratitude into love. They didn't rush to turn fear into promises. They just let things mature, like a seedling hidden under the snow all winter. When it emerges, it's because the time has come. Simon jumped off his horse and ran up to the porch. Miss Evelyn, did you see me tie the rope? Father said I did well. The boy held out his hand. It was covered in dirt. Evelyn smiled and took it. That's good. Dad doesn't praise people for no reason. Simon craned his neck to look at her, his eyes mischievous but sincere. Dad smiles more since you came. She was startled. Really, yes. Father smiled, like he wasn't sad anymore. Evelyn choked. She stroked Simon's hair, then looked at Jonah. He was saddling his horse against the fence, broad-backed and poised. His words, so simple, had touched the deepest part of her. She never thought she could be good for anyone. But with Jonah, maybe she was. That afternoon, Evelyn went to the well to draw water. The air was damp, the smell of earth and pine resin mixed together, reminding her of Kansas, but the memory no longer had the edge of a knife. It receded, faded like an old painting returned to its proper drawer. Jonah emerged from the warehouse, his sleeves rolled up, some oil on his arms from repairing a door hinge. "Let me help you," he said, seeing her struggling with the full bucket of water. "It's okay. I can do it." "I know you can do it," Jonah replied, his voice low. "But let me do it." She looked at him for a few seconds. The way he said it wasn't about taking, but about sharing. Evelyn let go of the crate's handle. Jonah picked it up with one hand and set it on the porch step. "Do you always think you have to carry everything alone?" she asked, half joking, half serious. Jonah looked at her, a thought crossing his eyes. "I used to," he said, "but lately I've started thinking. Maybe not necessarily." Evelyn chuckled. "So, what does that mean?" Jonah did not answer immediately. He stepped closer, standing in front of her, close enough that Evelyn could hear his deep breathing. "Evelyn," Jonah said, his head bowed. "Do you know what I fear most?" She shook her head. "Not the blizzard. Not Lucas. It's the feeling of thinking that you're leaving this place." Evelyn stood still. She hadn't expected to hear that, but she had been waiting for it in her own quiet way. "Jonah," she said softly, her voice trembling because what she wanted to say was so new. Jonah continued, "I said you were the one I wanted to build with. I don't take that back. Not that day for the court and not today for peace. I said it. Because it's the truth in my heart." Evelyn felt her breath catch. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "What do you want us to be, Jonah?" A light wind blew through the space between them, and Jonah said what they had both kept silent for too long. "I want you to stay here. In this house. By my side. Not as a guest. Not for me to protect and then leave, but as someone who will be with me for the rest of my life." Evelyn's heart was pounding so hard she had to put her hand on her chest. Jonah reached out and touched her cheek lightly, very lightly, as if afraid she would disappear if he touched her any harder. "I don't promise life here will be easy. The West has never been gentle. But I promise, I will never let you stand alone again." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. Then she placed her hand on his. "Jonah, I came here to escape, but with you, I feel alive." Jonah's eyes deepened at that. "So, are you staying?" he asked, each word clear, slow, as honest as the earth. Evelyn looked back at the house behind them, the fire, the wooden table, Jonah's coat on the hook, Simon's laughter echoing from it. It wasn't what she'd imagined her future to be, but it was what she wanted most. A place with the smell of pine, the stains of old wood, the steady sound of a man's footsteps inside. A place where she belonged. She took a deep breath, then said, her voice firmer than ever, "I'm staying. And I want to build with you." Jonah's face felt as if a great stone had been dropped from his face. He felt as if he could breathe for the first time in a long winter. He bent down very slowly, as if asking her in silence. Evelyn looked up. For a moment there was only the sound of birds in the trees and their breathing. Jonathan kissed her. A slow, deep, unhurried kiss. The kiss of a man who had lived through loss, and finally dared to open up. Evelyn trembled slightly in his arms, but with happiness, an emotion she thought she would never experience. When they returned to the house, Simon stood in the doorway, his face bewildered. "Miss Evelyn." "Father, why are you two?" Evelyn blushed. Jonah laughed, a rare, thick, warm laugh. "We'll have dinner," Jonah said, ruffling his son's hair. "The three of us." Evelyn walked into the kitchen, her heart still racing. Jonah followed, pausing in the doorway for a second, as if taking in the image of the woman standing in the afternoon light, not a temporary guest, but one of his, of this house. They ate their dinner in whispers and the crackling of firewood. The night came as softly as silk. Outside, the sky was clear. The mountains stood still as witnesses to a silent change. Evelyn looked at the small room, at Jonah, adjusting the wobbly wooden chair, at Simon dozing at the table, and felt her heart open like a window to the sunlight. It turns out that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about finding a place where the past no longer scares you. And Evelyn Marlowe knew it was Jonah Ridgewell's side. The night wind blew across the roof. The fire in the stove was still red. A new chapter of life began slowly, quietly, but stronger than any storm. Jonah and Evelyn's story reminds us of something that is universal. Old wounds can make people shrink, but they can also be a place where light can shine through. None of us live a full life without loss. But what defines us is not the pain we feel, but how we move forward after it. Jonah teaches us that silence in its right place can be a kind of strength. Evelyn reminds us that dignity and tenderness, even when wounded, can be a source of new life. And both prove it's never too late to find a home. It's never too late for the heart to learn to love again. Thank you, especially those of you who are more than halfway through your life, for following, listening, and feeling. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue to bring stories of healing and hope. Thank you very much.